It's Lent.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Am I speaking to myself? Am I telling myself good morning?
Let's try that again.
Let's try it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a beautiful morning. Let's take it all in and just enjoy it. Delighted and very pleased to see you, Miss Olson. Thank you for being here. Say it ain't so. Just say it ain't so. You've been so helpful over the years. First of all, we want to thank you for all your help and for all of your great service to this committee, the full committee, to the Congress, and to the American people. Thank you. Well, the subcommittee is already in order. Let me begin by thanking Ms. Olson, the National Taxpayer Advocate, for being here today. Thank you for all of your help. Thank you for your service, not just to the committee, but to our Congress and to the American people. I want also to congratulate you on your upcoming retirement. Thank you for your 18 years of outstanding service to taxpayers and this Congress as our advocate. Ms. Olson has worked long and hard on behalf of American taxpayers. The National Taxpayer Advocate provides a voice within the agency for thousands and millions of Americans. Across this country, Ms. Olson, colleagues help our citizens and assist our caseworkers in addressing complex tax matters. In addition, this office acts as the eyes and ears for Congress with respect to problems facing taxpayers. Simply said, we cannot do our job without your great and good work. And again, I want to say thank you for your service. You will be deeply missed. And I'm not just speaking words, you will be deeply missed. Today, we will learn what taxpayers face as they attempt to file their tax return. This is a trying and difficult time. Many news stories report that taxpayers were surprised and confused during this first filing season under the new Republican tax law. We also will examine how the longest government shutdown in the United States history harmed taxpayer services and the agency. Finally, we reviewed the Taxpayer Advocate's most recent report to Congress. We have shared a mission, obligation, and mandate to make sure that all taxpayers, especially those who are low income, disabled, and senior citizens, to receive fair, quality, and in-person service. I look forward to this update and discussion, and once again, I thank the witnesses, this public servant, for years of service and for joining us today. And I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member for his open statement. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today. First off, Ms. Olson, I can't believe, as I read through your testimony and read through your background, what you've actually meant, not just to this committee and to the country, but all our taxpayers. It's an incredible life of service. So I echo the words that the chairman said. I don't think that enough people throughout our nation understand the dedication that people working within our government have for our citizens. I keep hearing all the time about, well, I wish they'd get something done in Washington. I wish they'd get something done in Washington. Boy, they're not getting anything done in Washington. Then I looked at your resume and I said, you've never stopped. You've never stopped working for the American people. So under your leadership, the Taxpayer Advocate Service has helped countless taxpayers in our districts get the information and service they deserve and need from the IRS. You've also brought issues and problems affecting taxpayers to the attention of Congress, which we greatly appreciated. You are our boots on the ground. You are that listening person. You are the person that's actually walking that walk, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk with our hardworking American taxpayers. I look forward to continue to work with you through the end of your tenure, as well as with Secretary Mnuchin, to ensure a seamless transition for the Taxpayer Advocate Service. I'd also like to take a minute to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their dedicated work during the last Congress on a bipartisan bill to restructure the IRS. The bill known as the Taxpayer First Act put the focus of the IRS back on customer service and on our taxpayers. It included over 50 provisions which represented the largest restructure of the IRS since the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act of 1998. And due to the tireless work of Chairman Lewis and then Chairman Lynn Jenkins and their staffs, by the way, I want to put a little emphasis on their staffs because I think too often members stand up and say, this is what I got done. It's not what I got done, it's what we got done. And I got to tell you, if it's not for the staff, none of this stuff gets done. None of it gets done. So, listen, we had broad bipartisan support. The bill included a number of common sense provisions that would help make the IRS a customer service-focused agency, putting an emphasis on treating taxpayers with the respect that they deserve and providing them with the service that they so desperately need. Now, to make sure the IRS is indeed customer-focused, the bill required the agency to develop a customer service strategy. It allowed the IRS to present a plan to Congress on how to best reorganize itself to carry out its mission of serving taxpayers. The bill also protected the IRS's low-income taxpayer clinics, which are vital for those who cannot afford to hire a tax professional, and made permanent the Volunteer Income Tax Assistant Matching Grants Program, which guarantees underserved populations access to quality tax preparers, which the chairman had just talked about. It's so incredibly important. Finally, the bill also took on important and long overdue steps to modernize the IRS's IT infrastructure, putting in much needed safeguards to ensure that taxpayer dollars don't continue to be wasted on poorly planned and poorly executed projects. With one of the oldest IT infrastructures in the federal government, it is essential that the IRS overcome challenges to IT modernization, many of which are not solely the result of budget limitations. So as we move forward during this Congress, I want to strongly urge that we make redesigning the IRS a priority. We've proven we're able to work in a bipartisan manner on this issue. And Mr. Chairman, I'm committed to working with you on this to see that we get it over the finish line. The IRS's ability to serve taxpayer comes into focus every year around this time. It's especially true as the IRS and Treasury Department continue to implement the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, through their hard work, the IRS and Treasury have updated countless IRS forms and released a number of very important pieces of guidance and regulations in preparation for the 2019 filing season. All of this work has helped taxpayers adjust to the new tax landscape. Of particular importance is the revised Form 1040, which simplified filing taxes for many by reducing the number of lines taxpayers have to complete. The IRS estimates that only 25 million taxpayers used the simpler 1040 form in 2017, known as the 1040EZ. In contrast, this year, nearly 47 million taxpayers will be able to complete the new postcard 1040, according to estimates from your office, Ms. Olson. The IRS and Treasury also took prompt action to update the 2018 withholding tables to account for the increase in the standard deduction, elimination of personal exemptions, and reductions in tax rates as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The revisions to the withholding tables aim to improve the accuracy of withholding so taxpayers could keep more of their own hard-earned money instead of having the government hold on to it interest-free until it's returned to them in the form of a refund. Early filing season statistics show that the average refund amount this year is in line with last year, having even increased slightly. Thus far, the IRS appears to be delivering the 2019 filing season as normal. Again, I want to thank you, Ms. Olson, for being with us today. And based on your experiences of working with taxpayers firsthand to address their needs, I look forward to hearing on your insights on the filing season and on what the committee should consider as we seek to refocus the IRS on real customer service. So thank you so much for being here. And again, I echo what my good friend, the chairman, says. You have been an incredible champion of hardworking American taxpayers. I thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
It's good to work with you. Thank you. Without objection, all members' open statements will be made part of the record. Any of you have anything, I'm sort of not following what the staff has suggested, but any of you have open statement to make?
I'm going to congratulate this lady, whether it's an opening statement or in my remarks, so you choose.
Okay.
No, I think we should all take the time right now to thank you for your public service. We're very grateful to you for the work that you've done and want to congratulate you on this next venture in your life. But in the meanwhile, you have to answer a lot of questions today.
I'm ready.
Thank you. Now we will hear from our witness. Ask that you limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Without objection, your entire statement will be included in the record. It is now my pleasure to introduce the National Taxpayer Advocate. This makes me sort of sad that I will not have an opportunity to introduce you in the weeks, months, or years to come, because you've been like a rock. You've been like a person who've been sailing against the wind and having it out during the time of a great storm. So, Ms. Olson, I want to thank you for being here, for all of your help and for all of your service over the years. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you. Chairman Lewis, Ranking Member Kelly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today about the IRS filing season. But first, I want to thank this subcommittee and the full committee for your support of the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, its employees, and me personally over almost 2 decades. As you know, last week I announced I will retire from the position of National Taxpayer Advocate on July 31st, 2019, after 18 years on the job. I am deeply grateful for the continued interest in and support you have shown for our legislative and administrative recommendations designed to strengthen taxpayer rights and improve tax administration. I must add that it's important my successor have the same passion and independent perspective that I brought to the job. The taxpayers of the United States deserve no less. Because the 2019 filing season began just over a month ago, it is too soon to provide a comprehensive assessment. Trends that are apparent today may reverse. Today and in my written statement, I present some preliminary data that, for the most part, reflects the IRS's performance through 4 weeks of the filing season. I also identify certain issues to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. The IRS faced 2 significant and unique challenges going into this filing season: implementation of a major new tax law, and a 5-week government shutdown. I commend the hard work and dedication of IRS employees as they navigated through this difficult and very demanding period. From a big picture perspective, the IRS has processed more than 47 million returns. About 96% have been filed electronically. Of all returns processed, 81% have received refunds, and the average refund has been $3,143. This data is comparable to last year's at this point in the filing season. On the phones to date, the IRS has reported a level of service of 57% on the account management lines, the main lines, and assisters have answered only 18% of taxpayer calls, both substantially below last year's levels. Taxpayers calling the installment agreement balance due line this filing season have fared worse. Only 15% of the calls from taxpayers trying to make payment arrangements were actually answered, and only after an average 60-minute wait time. The decline in the IRS's telephone service has almost surely been budget-driven. We estimate the IRS's inflation-adjusted budget is more than 20% lower today than it was in fiscal year 2010, and the IRS workforce overall is down by about 23%. Very simply, fewer assisters mean fewer calls answered. I have recommended that Congress provide the IRS with additional funding for taxpayer services in the past, and I continue to do so. IRS account management employees not only answer calls on the toll-free lines, but also respond to taxpayer correspondence. The IRS shifts employees between the two functions based on current needs. However, it has no good option when phone volumes and correspondence inventories are simultaneously high. Correspondence inventories are up 152%, and overage inventories are up 333% as compared with the same time last year. So the IRS cannot shift employees to improve telephone responsiveness without falling further behind in addressing taxpayer correspondence. It's essentially a zero-sum game. Next, overly broad fraud detection filters cause refund delays for hundreds of thousands of taxpayers. Last year, the false positive rate for the IRS's general refund fraud filters was 81% and caused a 287% increase in taxpayer advocate service cases involving this issue. The IRS has made changes intended to improve its selection and processing of these returns, and early results are promising, but it's too soon to assess that they are actually working as intended. After the enactment of the Tax Reform Act, the IRS redesigned the iconic Form 1040, breaking it up into a main form and 6 separate schedules, and eliminated the 1040A and the 1040EZ. For taxpayers with simple returns, the shorter form provides simplification. But the majority of taxpayers, about 68%, will have to complete additional schedules, and the new form is likely to create more complexity. About 55 million taxpayers who previously completed only the Form 1040 will now have to complete at least 2 additional schedules to report the same information. That will add complexity and probably increase tax preparation fees. I recommend taxpayers be given the option of completing either the new postcard 1040 or the traditional 1040, whichever works best for them. Finally, under the TCJA, a taxpayer must provide a qualifying child's Social Security number to claim the full child tax credit, which has replaced the dependents exemption through 2025. Some religious groups, notably the Amish, do not obtain SSNs for religious reasons. There are constitutional and other legal questions about whether otherwise qualifying individuals may be denied a tax credit where satisfying an identification number requirement violates their religious beliefs. The IRS has not decided whether to allow the credit in these circumstances this year, despite having decades-old procedures in place to work around the identification number issue. In my written testimony, we make recommendations to address the concerns I raise here, and we discuss other tax administration issues. In closing, I want to reiterate my gratitude and respect for this subcommittee and its staff, from whom I have learned a great deal. I look forward to your questions.
Ms. Olson, thank you for your testimony. Ms. Olson, your testimony paints a picture of an agency in trouble. What grade would you give the IRS for taxpayer service?
I am very concerned that the IRS, after years of not having adequate funding for taxpayer service, that it is at a point that it is stretched so thin that things could go very badly wrong, or just simply that taxpayers will give up trying to reach the IRS and not get the assistance that they need. When you look at the numbers of calls that actually come in, there's clearly an unmet demand, and we are simply not able to answer those calls. You know, when we can only answer 28% of the calls coming in, that's a terrible thing. When we can't process the correspondence that is in there, that drives people to call us more. And then when they can't get through, they write us letters, and you see this endless cycle just going on. And just for the taxpayer service in particular, the answer is certainly you can get gains from online services and things like that. But the only way to really resolve taxpayer service issues is you need more employees providing those services, answering those calls, and dealing with that correspondence.
Ms. Olson, how long will it take for the agency to recover from the 5-week shutdown?
So I had estimated 12 to 18 months, and that was based on my being on daily calls during the shutdown with those members of the IRS leadership who were accepted, myself included, and then looking at the numbers of the correspondence, EITC audits that had not been completed from last year, as well as the fact that the IRS is right now going through their work plans, what they had scheduled to do as work this year, and they are all adjusting them downward in order to be able to realistically set goals. And I'm worried that what's happened this year with the audits will push into next year's filing season as well.
Ms. Olson, the chairperson and I wrote 2 letters asking for information about a survey conducted on the new IRS Form 1040. What do you know about the survey?
The IRS, rightfully so, does testing and user testing for most new forms that it creates. And so for the simplified 1040, it contracted to do taxpayer testing with the form. And it's not really a survey, it's actually observations of taxpayers trying to complete the form or completing the form, and then their comments. And the IRS took their comments, and is trying to look at, what do we do with changing the form and things like that. So there is a report, and there are taxpayer comments. There are also taxpayer comments that have been submitted on the form to a website that there is a spreadsheet that contains those comments.
Furthermore, Ms. Olson, a report issued last year said that about 30 million Americans would not have enough tax held from the paycheck to meet the tax liability. What are you seeing, and how has your workload increased this filing season?
The thing about balance due returns is that they are usually filed toward the very end of the filing season, so people wait until the end to pay the bill. Or if they can't pay the bill, then that creates work for the IRS after the filing season. And I said in my testimony that the phone number, the balance due phone line, which is the line that those taxpayers will call if they can't pay their tax due and get a letter from us saying you owe us, please call this number, that is at 15% level of service, and people have to wait 60 minutes to get through. That has very great significance if there are 10 million, 20 million, 5 million more people that have to call that line.
Recently, we learned that some of the IRS private debt collector called taxpayers on average of 106 times. What do you think the private debt collection program is one of the most serious problems? Do you think it is one of the most serious problems? Some of us been questioning this program for some time, and we haven't been able to fix it.
My focus has been on how the IRS is administering this program and some of the rules it's set for private debt collectors. And one of my first objections, and the Inspector General has shared this very vocally himself, is that the IRS declined to create a complaint cycle, a complaint board, where taxpayers who are getting 165 calls or whatever could call, let the IRS know that that was happening to them, and IRS officials would look at it. There is really no vehicle for taxpayers to file those complaints. And that's different from the last time the IRS did the program before it was suspended. It had a complaint function that you could call. So just that issue just demonstrates the way the IRS is administering the program. I have other concerns, the way that taxpayers are entering into installment agreements that they really cannot afford, but the private debt collectors do not take financial information, and so they can't tell that the taxpayer cannot afford.
And you still think that this program is one of the most serious problems?
Yes.
Confronting
I
the IRS?
project it will be on the list of most serious problems going forward, regardless of who is the national taxpayer advocate.
Well, thank you very much. Now, I turn to the gentle lady from Illinois for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, congratulations. Wish you the best in the future, and so thankful for the decades of service that you've provided, and so thankful just to represent the folks that I do, that you've just been a tremendous blessing to. So many callers, so many constituents, so many questions, that you've been a problem solver, and for that I'm very, very grateful. So this will be one of our last times that we talk about IRS IT systems, and I'm grateful. And you're in a vantage point that really nobody else is in. So I just want to talk briefly about where we are with this IT system problem, how we got there, and just would love to hear your vantage point and what we need to do. And I look forward to working with the committee on making sure that we have bipartisan solutions. The modernization effort of IRS's IT was one of our top priorities during the last Congress. Over the last 2 years, we've held a number of hearings and briefings with countless experts in an effort to better understand the challenges and shortcomings in the area with the IRS. What we found out was really no surprise to anybody. The IRS continues to struggle with everything from undertaking and completing larger IT modernization efforts to even the simplest of IT replacements. These issues result in millions of dollars of taxpayer wasted or spent maintaining systems that are no longer useful to the IRS or to taxpayers. So while the IRS faces a number of hurdles as it continues to modernize itself, we found that many are not solely the result of budget limitations. Instead, they're often the result of management failures, poor decision-making, or the IRS must demonstrate that it's capable of managing its budget by better prioritizing of its IT investments, providing more transparent reporting to Congress, and ceasing to undertake failed procurements that result in millions of dollars being spent or wasted. For this reason, I still strongly believe that we need to ensure that the IRS is effectively and efficiently spending the IT funds they already have before giving them any additional funding. I introduced H.R. 5362, the IRS Information Technology Accountability Act, during the last Congress, and I was happy to see it included in the Taxpayer First Act. My bill would have taken some important steps to prevent future IT boondoggles and instill accountability. Unfortunately, as you know, we couldn't reach a final agreement on IRS reform before the end of Congress, but I do hope we are able to, and I continue to want to work with my coworkers to do that. So you know the IRS's antiquated IT systems have real impacts on taxpayers. So from your perspective, as you look at these real impacts that it does have on taxpayers in your position, what are the types of challenges that you're hearing about directly from taxpayers that are a result of this issue with the IRS and IT?
Well, you know, the word accountability is incredibly important to me, and I applaud the work that you're trying to do. My number one legislative recommendation this year was both, yes, to give the IRS a dedicated funding stream for the big leap of replacing our core our core systems that are the official record of taxpayer counts, so that they are 21st century technology as opposed to 1960s technology. But that is a huge leap, and you can't give them a blank check, that there has to be oversight and independent assessments every step along the way. You know, third-party assessments saying, is their plan right? Is it too ambitious? Are they really telling you what they can do or can't do? Are they being honest about the challenges? Not, whitewashing them? And then every year, before any more money comes to them, there is that update. From a taxpayer perspective, The fact that we have this 1960s technology and 60 case management systems that hold information about the taxpayer, and there is no one 360 view of the taxpayer, means that if somebody calls up on the phones, it may be that that employee cannot see the information in the system. Something as simple as the taxpayer saying, I made a payment last week, but it hasn't gone through our weekly cycle update to get into the system that this employee can see. We can't tell them whether that payment's been made. So things like that. We want to do online services and create a robust online account, which may pull people off the phones, help us in that area. But if you have to pull data from 60 different case management systems to create a robust online account, you're doing custom programming to each and every single one of them, and you're spending operations and maintenance money every single day to keep those systems up to date. If somebody doesn't upgrade, you've got to reprogram again. And that goes into this sinkhole. And, that's why I've really focused on, yes, there are things we need to do around the margins, but individual master file and business master file, those core systems, and a 360-degree database of taxpayer information is core. And I don't know what it's going to take to do that, but it needs, as you said, accountability, transparency, and I do think it needs more money. The last thing I'll say is what really got the IRS into trouble back in the 90s that led to the Restructuring Act of 1998 in part was the failure to really monitor in the procurement area its prime contractors, so that there were huge cost overruns and change orders and things like that, and no one was really minding the store. So you have to have really talented procurement people monitoring these contracts. So that's another transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. Thanks and congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair is now pleased to recognize the gentle lady from the state of Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Olson, I also just want to extend my thanks and congratulations to you on your retirement. But thank you for all of your service. It's made a huge difference for taxpayers in my region and across the country, and definitely have been an incredible resource for this committee. In fact, last month I had a very informative meeting with our local taxpayer advocate for Washington State, and he talked about a lot of the important work being done for our taxpayers and the help that has been provided to help folks with their taxes and challenges that they've had with the IRS. We were just talking about IT, and I know you stated in your recent annual report to Congress that the IRS has profound information technology systems issues, and we just talked about that a little bit. When you think about the 1960s systems that you talk about, and you alluded to this in your testimony a little bit too, what about the security risk and to personal information and privacy for taxpayers?
I think that there are two risks there. One is, the IRS's systems are, there are hacking attempts as this second. It just keeps happening and happening and happening. We have the mother lode of financial information and family structure and employment about taxpayers. I think the IRS does an incredible job of protecting that. In fact, sometimes that's why taxpayers can't create online accounts, because we have such high authentication standards that they fail them. The legitimate people fail them. I think where our biggest challenges are is that identity theft has been going on for so long now, 13, 20 years, and the thieves have gotten so sophisticated. They're getting information not from the IRS. They're getting it from other entities, hacking into other entities, getting companies to, phishing companies to get full W-2 data sets. And once somebody has that, it becomes very difficult for the IRS to tell whether you are the legitimate person or not the legitimate person, because the thief looks identical and has all the information about that taxpayer. And that's the challenge that the IRS is really thinking about a lot. So on its cyber side, it's very much monitoring what's happening to its systems. On the one hand, having 1960 systems is a positive thing because no one knows the language anymore. So who can get, who can get in? I don't mean that facetiously. I mean, it's because it's such a dinosaur. there's that.
And then it has other consequences
then
for
it has other
taxpayer
consequences.
services too. Yeah. I'm switching gears a little bit. The gig economy is an area of concern. There are many workers now in this economy, and it could be time to review the reporting rules related to these workers. I wondered what you thought about new systems to help gig economy workers, whether a withholding system or something like that would help these workers when it came time to file their taxes.
Well, the first thing is I do support the proposals that have been put out, to both raise the non-employee and self-employment reporting from $600 to $1,000 a year per service recipient, but then lowering the 1099-K threshold from 20,000 to 1,000. I think that brings parity between the different populations of service providers. I think that I have proposed in the past voluntary withholding for independent contractors so people could say, I have a really hard time saving and paying quarterly taxes. I want the person to go ahead and withhold something at a flat rate from whatever they're paying. And on a voluntary basis, I think that would work very well. Once you have that issue once, you may not want to have, once you have a balance due once, you may not want to have it again, and you would participate in that system.
Mm-hmm. And have you been hearing from folks, gig economy workers in your office with questions?
Yes, we have, and we're also trying to work, we've proposed that the IRS create a publication just for gig economy workers because the things that are of importance to them are spread out between 5 or 6 different publications that are like 400 pages long combined. That was one of our recommendations. The IRS said no. So my staff is trying to pull together a draft publication, and then we'll give it to the IRS and say, okay, we did your work for you. You publish it. So we'll see.
Okay, thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now is pleased to recognize the gentleman from Illinois. How's your father doing?
Thanks for asking. He's doing well, Mr. Lewis.
Well, please tell him I said hi.
I sure will.
I miss seeing him.
Thanks.
I would tell him you're doing a great job.
If you see him, thank you. If you see him, Mr. Chairman, see if you can ask him to work on college funds for grandkids. That's what
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Olson, thank you for your service to our country as our taxpayer advocate. And we're indebted to your service, and you will be missed. So thank you. I want to talk a little bit today about taxpayer advocate directives. And it's something that I've focused on. And in your statement announcing your retirement, you mentioned that one of your priorities before you retire is to publish guidance on taxpayer advocate directives. Currently, or I guess in 2018, how many taxpayer advocate directives did the taxpayer advocate issue to the IRS?
I think I only issued 3. I threatened to issue many more.
Okay. And are there currently any restrictions or limitations in the taxpayer advocate service ability to issue these directives?
It's not so much the issuance. There are steps that we have to take that I think reduce our ability to immediately get attention to the issues. And that's something that I want to get clear in the guidance that I issue. My main concern has been the appeal process, where getting the senior leadership of the IRS to look at these things and respond specifically to us. Don't give me a half-page memo saying, we're not doing it because we said so, but specifically laying out why they are not going to do what we are ordering them to do. And then the appeal process from that up to the commissioner.
Gotcha. On average, how many days did it take the IRS to respond to the directives in 2018?
In 2018, they were pretty good. I would set the deadlines, maybe 30 days, sometimes 60 days, and they would respond.
Within that time frame?
Within that time frame. My more concern was the quality of the response.
And is the IRS required to respond to the directives at all or within a specified amount of time?
There is no statutory authority, so it's just, I say in the directive, respond within these days, and if they don't do it, I have no authority to enforce it. Unlike the taxpayer assistance orders in the law.
And if I understand your answer prior, in 2018, they were responsive during the period of time.
They were, but other times they have not been.
Gotcha.
200 days before I get a response.
And if the IRS decides to modify or rescind a directive, can you appeal that decision?
Depending on the level, I can appeal it up to the deputy commissioner. And I would then have to raise it in a conversation with the commissioner, but there is no formal procedure for appealing it to the commissioner. And that is my concern. These are issues, these are systemic issues that I should be able to appeal the deputy commissioner's decision to the commissioner.
And has that change been recommended?
I have recommended that, and that will, and I will be putting it in our guidance, but it's just guidance and it's not requirement. With the taxpayer assistance orders, which are about specific cases as opposed to systemic issues that affect many taxpayers, the law says that the commissioner or the deputy commissioner can overturn or modify my order. And so built into the law is an appeal to the commissioner. But that doesn't exist in the Taxpayer Advocate Directive because it's not statutory. It's just an administrative thing.
And what's the status on the guidance that will be put forth?
We're about to put it into circulation with the IRS, and it'll circulate for about 30 days, and I'll hear what they think about what I'm putting into place. I'll be glad to share that with you if you'd like.
And will you still be in your position when this is completed?
I am hoping that it will be completed and what I can leave for the next National Taxpayer Advocate in a strong position, and if not, I will be bringing that to your attention in the June report to Congress.
Well, obviously, I think that guidance will be very important for future folks in your position. So, again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair is now pleased to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your upcoming retirement. This might be still a bit too early to really delve into this, so perhaps it's better for a month or two from now. But based on what we know now, what information could you offer with respect to those who might have the rude awakening of being faced with the underpayment penalty? Because I'm specifically thinking about those who are in areas that the limit on SALT at $10,000, which California's gotten a lot of attention, New York, New Jersey. I'd also point out for those of us in the Philadelphia area, especially if you live in a suburb of Philadelphia, pay high property taxes, support great school districts, work in the city of Philadelphia, which is with its wage tax, combined with the state income tax, suddenly you're upwards of 7% of your income before you even get to the property tax bill. There are a number of constituents of mine who now are severely under that limit of $10,000. So I'm wondering to what extent you could shed some light on how many are suddenly being faced by this underpayment penalty.
The only numbers that I have are what the Government Accountability said overall, that possibly 30 million taxpayers would be under withheld. But I don't think they did the count. I didn't see the numbers that they might have projected for state and local. I am very concerned about this because it also creates more work for the IRS and burden for the taxpayer. But I don't think we'll know, again, until the end of the filing season, because that's when the BAL-due returns come in. One thing I will say, the Treasury Department has said that for underpayment of estimated tax, that they will waive that penalty if you've paid 85% of the year before. Now, for the 86 Tax Reform Act, which was the last major tax reform, Congress waived the estimated tax penalty completely for the first year because you just couldn't project as hard as you wanted to.
Sorry, was that a subsequent act of Congress, or was that actually?
That was actually in the act. And the other thing that they did, though, was they also mandated that everybody had to submit a new W-4. In this act, we don't have the requirement that people submit a new W-4. It's just voluntary, so that's where you get some problems. And the Treasury Department is using its discretion to waive it for 85% of the payments. I've been sort of advocating, why aren't we in this first year doing what we did for 1986? And there's really no prohibition against it for, the administration to say, yes, let's do that. I'll be watching that, and that may be a taxpayer advocate directive, saying it's just all the uncertainty, whether it's state and local or, W-4s or people just not paying attention. Let's get it right this first year, give them a break.
Well, Ms. Olson, I want to thank you for clearly you're already looking in this direction. Dovetailing on what Ms. Olson just said, I would urge us in the committee the next 6 weeks to 8 weeks or so to revisit this topic, and would support her suggestion that we do all that we can in this first year to make sure people are not really unfairly penalized by this change in the law. Thank you. I yield back.
Let me thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for that recommendation and suggestion. Thank you very much. Now I recognize the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Olson, for being here. Thank you for your service to the country, to all of our constituents and U.S. citizenry, and the hard work that you put in, and truly in the name of service, you have done that. It's appreciated. I do want to talk briefly about the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, which I know you're very familiar with, and I'll be leading a bipartisan bill and appropriations letter with Dr. Davis later this month. The provisions of this bill were in the Taxpayer First Act last year here in the House, and the program is intended, for those who don't know, to help low-income Americans be tax compliant in filing their taxes. In your organization's view, is the IRS effectively managing the Vita program, as we call it?
I feel that it's doing what it can, but I think that if it had more employees to support that program, that there would be better, the program would be able to do so much more. It's also limited what some of the programs can do. A lot of them want to do simple sole proprietorship schedules or farmer schedules, and it's sort of discouraged because the IRS doesn't provide training on those issues. And so I think having a grant program that's statutory, that spells out you should look in these areas, as your legislation does, is just really going to focus the IRS to give more support and direction to the program.
And to that point of the grant, what would the advantages or potential disadvantages be of the grant being on a permanent basis?
I think, first of all, I just know from the Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic program, which I administer, it gives a structure around it, and it gives us the sense of how Congress wanted us to use these funds. And we have used that directive in the law, to actually, develop a whole infrastructure for the program and guidance for the program that doesn't really exist for the Vita program, and support for the program. In my office, we have analysts who are actually advocates for the LITC. So if they have troubles in certain areas, we go out and we help them solve those problems. And I think a permanent structure and a permanent basis would really say, yes, we're going to dedicate those kind of resources to those wonderful programs who are doing really good work.
Thank you. And do you believe the IRS could improve the awareness of the program amongst potential volunteers, and how can we help with that, if you will?
Well, it has a web page and a phone line, but if you call, it's not really updated a lot. And I think that, again, it's not a question of willingness. It's a question of, do you have the staff to really put to this and do what could be done? And I don't know what I've talked to some of the Vita sites, and they really treasure their relationship with the IRS employees, so they sort of don't want to criticize them. But, I think they really feel like they need more support, and they would love to have more publicity. It's not just putting it up on the website, but really somebody out there talking about it.
Yeah, when you have a program that's truly making a positive difference, the concerns are awareness and access. And Do you think there's a shortage of volunteers, or we could recruit better? I think what you're saying, ma'am, is that if we had more employees managing this, everything could flourish a little
Yeah,
bit.
I don't think it needs a huge infrastructure. It could just even be 5 more employees, but that would be a great support. I think the access issue is a question whether the IRS is, they're focusing on large programs because that's easier to administer, but that may work against the rural areas or the less populated states where you maybe need a smaller grantee. You know, it's not part of an umbrella organization, or it's a more rural organization, and it's doesn't have the resources that other places do, but it's a really important location.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem in my district is both urban and rural, and so it's a problem in either place, but with different needs sometimes.
Different issues.
Yeah. Listen, thank you very much, and again, I appreciate your service. Now yield back.
Thank you. The chair now is pleased to recognize the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Olson, thank you again for your service. I'm from New York. We don't like the tax bill. It was bad for us in New York. In fact, every Democrat and every Republican on Long Island and in New York City voted against this tax bill because the main reason, there's a lot of reasons, but the main reason is because the capping of the SALT deduction at $10,000. So a lot of people's taxes are going up, and I'm going to tell some stories about that if I have time at the end of my questioning of you. But I think that this is a bad news story for a lot of people throughout the country. So the staff here gave me some information that they got from the IRS that as of February 21st, there were 783,000 tax returns with errors that needed to be resolved by an IRS employee, a 200% increase over the same time last year. Are you finding that same type of thing in the work that you do?
Well, this is what one of the areas that I am monitoring like a hawk. This is called the error resolution system. And it's where there's something wrong with the return. It's not fraud. It's that somebody.
No, it's errors. 200% increase in errors.
And it's it's a huge increase.
Okay, that's all. I want to just demonstrate that. You know, we were talking about during this tax reform process how we were going to simplify everything, but now we've seen a 200% increase in the number of errors. I'm looking at your testimony that you gave here. It says that assisters have only answered 18% of taxpayer calls, substantially below last year's levels. That's bad news, right?
It's terrible news.
I mean, I'm looking at the statistics. People have to wait 17 minutes before they can talk to someone on the phone. I mean, I complain about the federal government. It's calcified and sclerotic. It's this big, huge, massive, hulking entity. And I've been on the phone with the federal government before in different agencies. I'm not just picking on one agency in particular, but we'll pick on the IRS today. But 17 minutes you have to wait, and only 18% of the people's calls get answered. That's upsetting.
Yeah.
Think of how frustrating we get when we're on the phone waiting for people. 17 minutes and only 18% get answers. The IRS is facing significantly larger correspondence backlogs than this point last year, right? Bad news.
Yep.
Tax law questions. TAS testers calling the toll-free lines with sample questions have received inconsistent service and inaccurate information. Yep. Bad news. The Form 1040, we're going to simplify it. We're going to have a postcard. It's going to be so simplified. Form 1040. But for the majority of taxpayers who will have to complete additional schedules, the new form is likely to create more complexity. Yep. That's bad news. This is all bad news about this tax bill and the impact that it's had on real people's lives. You actually said in your testimony, and I just want to repeat this because you don't even have to answer it. I'm just going to read your testimony. You said here. I am concerned that the new Form 1040 will cause additional complexity and hassle for many taxpayers and preparers. You've been doing this for 18 years. You're an independent person. You're not a Democrat. You're not a Republican. You're a professional public servant. Everybody's grateful to your service. And you're saying, boy, in my independent judgment, the new Form 1040 will cause additional complexity and hassle for many taxpayers and preparers. While most taxpayers who self-prepare their returns will use software, some like to make entries directly onto Form 1040. Now they will have to work through multiple forms and schedules and carry totals from schedules to the main Form 1040, increasing the risk of errors. That's bad news. So this is bad news for my taxpayers because their taxes are going up. As fact, of the 176 congressional districts, according to data from previous years, that have a SALT deduction greater than $10,000, 49 of the top 50 are from New York, New Jersey, and California. And we heard our colleague from Pennsylvania talking about how Pennsylvania is getting treated badly. I guess Mr. Kelly sees some of the same thing. So we've got a problem with this tax bill, certainly in New York and in New Jersey and in California and in other places in this country. And this was sold as a tax decrease. And in fact, I had a woman call me up the other day. How much time do I have? 47. She called me up. She's crying on the phone. And the problem is the country is so different from place to place. People don't appreciate how different it is from place to place. This woman, if you heard her story in other states, you'd say, oh, she must be in great shape. Between she and her husband, she's a registered nurse. She works 50 to 60 hours a week. Her husband is a retired union supermarket worker. They made $160,000 between the two of them. That sounds, wow, $160,000. She's choking. She has $300,000 in student debt for her children. She's got a $400,000 home. Other people say, oh, $400,000 home, she must be rich. No, she's got a leak in the bathroom that's leaking downstairs into the rooms downstairs from the bathroom upstairs. She hasn't fixed it for years. And her taxes have gone from getting a refund that she's getting an increase this year because of the elimination of the SALT deduction. So we have to accept the fact that in America, we're all Americans. But certain places have gotten hit very badly by this tax bill. And it's hurting the people of New York. And New Yorkers are Americans too. And so are the people in California. They're Americans too. And the Americans did not all get a tax. New Jersey, they're even Americans, as hard as that is to them. So these people are getting hurt by this tax bill, and it's just not fair. And we need to understand. I was talking to a friend of mine from Oklahoma the other day, and I'm sorry for going a little bit over, Mr. Chairman. And he's saying, boy, a $400,000 home in my district, you have a brand new house with granite countertops, a brand new bathroom, an in-home theater on an acre of property. In my district, $400,000, you're in trouble. You're having a hard time. So we have to recognize the country is different from place to place, and this tax bill was a punch in the gut for my district and for many other places in my region and in many other places throughout the country. And on top of it, not only being bad from the tax perspective, from more your bailiwick, okay, is that there are a lot of errors and mistakes. This is not simplified, and this is a calcified, sclerotic, broken operation. And I wanted to talk about the computers too, but I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. The chair is pleased to recognize my friend and my brother, the ranking member from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Olson, again.
How's your grandson done?
My grandson's fine. The chairman made a great contact with my grandson. We went to the 50th anniversary of crossing the Pettus Bridge, and actually were able to walk with the chairman. And at the time, he was only, I think, 6 or 7 years old. And so I told him we were going to cross that bridge. I have pictures of the chairman with him as we're walking and in the hotel before we left. But my little grandson, George, was really so impressed with Mr. Lewis. And he said, so, Grandpa, this is really good. We get to walk across the bridge on the 50th anniversary. I said, George, I'll tell you how impressed I am with this. We're coming back with Mr. Lewis, and we're going to walk across this bridge for the 100th anniversary. And he said, Grandpa, how old are you now? I said, well, I'm 64. He said, I don't know that you'll be walking. I said, okay, well, then you can push me across. But you made such an impression on him, and that I think of all the things that we do in this Congress, and I know we disagree on a lot of things, but what I don't think we disagree on, a number of great people that serve. You have made such a big difference in the lives of so many. I thank you for that. And that little boy will remember that forever. And now he's 13 years old. He's actually taller than you now. So those pictures, he was down here. Now he's got a little bit bigger. But you know what? He's still strong in his belief in you and in this great country. So
Well, we won't hold that time against you. Thank
yeah, okay. Well, yeah, well, you know what? I really am concerned. I want to get back to on third-party contacts. I think that a lot of the things that we do, and I don't mean this in any way to be disrespectful of the IRS, but I don't think there's anything more chilling in a taxpayer's life than to get, and by the way, they'll get a letter. I've had many calls of people telling me they're from the IRS and they need to talk to me about something. I'll say, you know what, I'm busy right now, but give me your number, I'll call you right back. And all of a sudden there's just a real quick click. But contacting third-party contacts, and sometimes this takes place where a friend, a neighbor, a coworker gets contacted by the IRS during an audit. Are you satisfied with, are the taxpayers themselves being notified ahead of time?
We had made this a most serious problem a few years ago. in response to concerns that were raised in cases we were seeing. And, the whole point of why Congress enacted this in 1998 was to give the taxpayer a chance to provide the information before the IRS made those contacts. So the law was, inform the taxpayer that you're going to make these third-party contacts, so the taxpayer could say, well, here, let me give you the information, and maybe you won't have to contact my clients or my customers or something like that. But the IRS has sort of written out of existence that notification requirement. It puts it in Publication 1, which it sends at certain times. It's in boilerplate language in the back of a lot of language on that form, and it says that that meets the legal requirement. And my position is it does not. And what we did was we looked at cases where the IRS had gone out and made third-party contacts and found that in most cases there wasn't a specific determination that they couldn't get the information from the taxpayer. They just wanted to go out and do that third-party contact. The Ninth Circuit, just 2 weeks ago, came down on a decision in a case citing our work, which made me very excited, ruling that in this case, that the taxpayer said you went out and contacted people and you shouldn't have, that Publication 1 didn't constitute notice. It was just stuck there. And I thought that was a very strong decision. So this requires some oversight, I think, from Congress to make the IRS do it right. There's nothing wrong with the law. The law is well written. It's that the IRS needs to implement the law as it is written.
Yeah, but a lot of these things, as they've gone on, I think it becomes an us versus them or a them versus us type of a situation. The IRS really is a service center. It's a revenue collector and an enforcer, but I've always worried about the people that there is such a chilling effect anytime you get anything from the IRS because you think right away, uh-oh, they're coming after me.
Right.
And I think if we can get through that and make it a lot easier on our taxpayers, you shouldn't be that intimidated by any one agency of the government. But this one does seem to have the most influence. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is in the last Congress, we developed the Taxpayer First Act. That was in a bipartisan, bicameral manner, and including a number of recommendations from your office. Is that a bill that you support?
I'm very supportive of the bill. There are some things in there that I've been talking to the staff about, just, tweaks, but I am so supportive of a focus on the IRS and its organization. The work that you've done about the Office of Appeals, for example, creating an independent Office of Appeals. This is all very important things to do. And it's time to look at, after it's 20 years since the Restructuring Act, and it's the 21st century. So it's well worth looking at what more can we do and making it a service-oriented organization. The IRS still views itself as an enforcement agency, and I feel that you shouldn't have that break between service and enforcement. When you're trying to enforce the law, you still provide service. So I don't see it as, either or. And I think, restructuring, looking at the structure of the IRS to reinforce that message that it's not either or is an important thing.
Well, let me ask you, because there's so many different agencies throughout our government. Your position as an advocate, what do you think about the other agencies throughout the government having these same type of services available? Because when I'm back home, and we all represent 705,000, 680,000 people, right? So there's a lot of people, but I've gotten to the point that when I get back home, what I get most of the time are concerns that people have that they cannot connect with the agencies that are supposed to serve them, and they feel almost like it's again, an us versus them. So how do we turn that page? And it would have to be through advocacy groups. I know with our veterans back home, because I have a large number of advocates in my district, or veterans in my district, they really need that help navigating these very complicated services.
And that was going to be an agency that I would recommend. And I know there are many support groups outside for the veterans, but having someone inside the agency that knows how it operates and has the equivalent of what I've got, a taxpayer assistance order, that can order the agency, for example, to expedite this review. Look at this documentation. This is creating significant hardship for this person, your normal processes. Same thing as Social Security on the disability side and other processing. Anywhere where you've got these big processes, and yes, they're advocates outside, but they can't see what's going on inside. I would heartily recommend that, and I'd be more than happy to work with your office, to work on the design of something like that.
I would really appreciate that. And as you wind down your service, looking over your years of experience, you can probably set up guidelines that could be taken across the board here on how we can become better servants of the people who elect us to represent them. So I want to thank you for what you're doing. And one thing I want to do submit for the record, because I know there's questions that go back and forth. This is an IRS document, by the way, that says the average tax refund from 2013 to 2019 filing seasons through the fourth week of February. We've actually gone from back in 2013, where the refund was $2,944, up to $3,143, which is the highest it's been. I know there's a lot of concern about going into a new tax code and how difficult it is and how much it's hurting different people. But there's a lot of other information out there that says, we're heading in the right direction. I know it's complicated, I know it's difficult, but it's also solvable. If we can't solve it here in the United States, then it can't be solved anywhere in the world. So again, I want to thank you for your service, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for having this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you. Without objection, this is submitted for the record. Thank you. Now I'm pleased to recognize the young lady from the great state of Wisconsin.
Thank you so very, very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me say, parting is such sweet sorrow. I just met you, Ms. Olson, as a new member of this committee, and I do want to thank you just sincerely for your service under these horrific conditions of being underfunded and the frustration that brings to taxpayers. I know it must be double, triple, quadruple for you. And so we want to thank you for your endurance. I want to talk a little bit about and you'll see where I'm going, because I want to talk about how the resources that you do have are being used on what class of taxpayers they're being used on. And I just noticed from a report I'm reading here for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities that the audit rates for individuals and corporations continues to decline. And it's gone down from just at 2011 to 2017, 12.5% audits down to 4.4%. And of course, the tax law has changed, and there is a great deal. There's a tax gap that they do every year, and I guess the last report I have is for 2008 to 2010, which was about $458 billion. I mean, there are real consequences, real money, that revenue that's not coming in, and we've incentivized it by not funding the IRS. That being said, I'm sure it's a fair statement that technology would help you collect some of these folks. I did look at the YouTube video of your systems because it was so unbelievable. I had to get a visual of that. But I want to know a couple of things. The debt collection process, is there a class of taxpayers that these folks are going after? Are they going after these high-end taxpayers, or are they going after people of more modest means?
Well, where the way the law is structured, the cases that go out to private debt collection are ones the IRS hasn't touched for a period of time. And so if you've got someone, the way the IRS looks at cases is, and we've criticized them for this, they look at the dollar level of the cases rather than the newness, for example, of the case. Where the debt is fresh, you actually have a greater chance, whether it's high debt or low debt, you just have a greater chance of collecting it. So what tends to get attention from the IRS are the larger debts and the older debts.
Okay, so thank you, because I want to ask you something else, because I got an answer to my question.
Yeah, okay.
The EITC withholding. I was very disturbed by the 2015 PATH Act, which says we're going to withhold the entire refund if any part of it has the EITC claim in it. And of course, that comes under your serious problems issues. And there's very little fraud, comparatively speaking, with EITC. Biggest problem is people don't use it. But tell me about the hardships of people having to wait. Are we putting more enforcement effort into denying poor people their refunds than we are in collecting taxes? That's my question.
Well, the EITC taxpayers are audited more than any other taxpayer other than the wealthiest taxpayers in the United States. So when you look at their audit rate compared to the overall audit rate or everybody in the middle, the only people who are audited more are the 1%. So there's that. I think actually that the delay in the refunds was actually an effort to try to keep people from being audited, that you would upfront match the W-2s from the employers with the income reported to the taxpayers, so you could correct any errors that might happen in the filing season rather than have to come back later after they've gotten the money and try to get it back from them and audit them. And it creates a burden because most of those taxpayers came in the last 2 weeks of January, and now they're basically waiting 3 more weeks, if not more, to get a refund that they desperately need. So it's a trade-off, and it's difficult. I have actually said maybe we should look at, for everybody, not paying out refunds until after we've gotten all the returns in and can do a good look at all of the returns rather than just focusing on EITC, gives the IRS a chance to make sure we're not paying out money in anywhere else, and then issue refunds, say a month and a half after the filing season ends. Everybody knows this is when you're going to get your refund. That has a big impact on the economy. It's not going to go.
Or just hire enough people. My time is gone, so I yield back.
Thank you. The chair is now pleased to recognize for 5 minutes the gentle lady from California.
Thank you so much. Ms. Olson, I want to thank you for your many years of service to the taxpayer community. You've done us so much good. I appreciate it. The Republican tax law made such severe changes to the tax code by eliminating such things as personal exemptions and capping the state and local tax deduction. And so I've long been concerned about taxpayers inadvertently under-withholding their tax liability this filing season. So I'd like to follow up on Mr. Boyle's questions. The IRS updated the withholding tables, but then my fears were confirmed when the GAO released a report last July saying that 1 in 5 taxpayers, or 30 million families, will under-withhold if they don't immediately update their withholdings. And so the IRS introduced the withholding calculator to help taxpayers assess their tax liabilities, their new tax liabilities, and determine the changes that they needed to make with their employers. But assessing these changes proved cumbersome for many, and H&R Block found that only 1 in 5 taxpayers updated their Form W-4 after passage of the tax law. My office heard firsthand from taxpayers who were not even aware that they were supposed to do that. And some were finding the process just too difficult and ultimately didn't update the document with their employer. So, Ms. Olson, how did you determine the amount to withhold from your own salary? I hear that you have a little story there.
Yeah, I'm an IRS employee, so if I don't get it right, then I'm fired. Okay, so there's that. So I had high motivation, and I tried it 3 times to calculate. I first went through the W-4, the new W-4. I then went to the online calculator, and I got a different answer there. And then I just went to the estimated tax form for 2018 and used the schedules off of that. And I finally sort of came up with a dollar amount that I knew needed to be divided through the pay periods that I had remaining in the year to hit, the number. And it took me actually, I thought I put in the right number of allowances. It took me 3 paychecks, basically 6 weeks, before I got what I thought was the right number to be withheld from my, now I haven't done my taxes so far this year, so we'll see whether I'm right or not. But it was just very complex to do that. And I'm pretty plain vanilla.
Well, considering what an expert you are, I am just astounded by that. And I know you mentioned that the last time the tax code was overhauled in 1986, the drafters included a blanket waiver of penalties for underpayments caused by the changes of the tax law. And I believe that provision was included because they knew that taxpayers would face the same withholding challenges that the families are facing today. And in fact, in their October 2018 report, the Information Reporting Advisory Committee recommended that the IRS waive underpayment penalties for the 2018 filing year. So based on your experience with this filing season, do you believe that some further form of relief should be provided, and is it appropriate for Congress to act now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the IRS should do whatever is within its administrative ability to provide relief. If Congress could, take some action on that, like they did with 1986, that would be excellent. I just think that would calm everybody down.
Well, thank you for that, because that's why I have introduced H.R. 1300, the Taxpayer Penalty Protection Act. And I'm pleased to announce that Senator Gillibrand introduced the Senate companion just yesterday, H.R. 1300, which shield taxpayers from underpayment penalties for the 2018 filing year as long as they've withheld 80% of their tax liability for the current year. The bill has been endorsed by the nonpartisan American Institute for Certified Public Accountants. And, Mr. Chair, I'd like to submit for the record the CPA's letter of support for this legislation. Thank you. I've heard from so many families in my district that rely on their refunds to make ends meet, to pay down bills, and to save for the future. Thanks to the Republican tax law, many owe the IRS and could be hit with these additional penalties. Filing season is now in full swing, and I urge the House to act as soon as possible to ensure that these complying taxpayers are not penalized any further. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the National Taxpayer Advocate for her time and for being here today. It is our hope that this is not the last time that we will see you. But please be advised that members will have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answer will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the Subcommittee on Oversight stand adjourned. But before we adjourn, I'd like to thank each and every member of the staff for all of your help and for all of your support. And we're now adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you.
Good job. Good being
This is our first meeting. You know that, don't you?
We're ready. We're up and running. Hey, we're going to get together this afternoon.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, no, no. So,
My executive development plan.
Should still get a picture with us. Mohammed. Come get a picture with me and Zach. Would you mind taking one? On the background. Obviously, yeah. So we're gonna switch places with you. We look good? We look good? Yeah, I'll send all the ones I took today along. Well, I think you guys yeah. You don't want me to be in it? No. No. Oh, do y'all want? That might be the picture that you actually.
No, give it. Selfie?
Yeah. Selfie? Okay. All right. We can do a selfie. You want me to take the photo?
That will help.
We are actually going to have to go get our pictures taken for back. Later, after we go get our pictures.
Good, how are you? I'm good. So Les Gordon announced his professor in residence.
Yes.
Last night.
Yeah.
On Twitter.
Was it on Twitter? I saw it on his procedurally taxing blog. Yeah.
His blog. So in my mind, he's a leading candidate for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to assume?
I just, you know, she's got views on things I'm not going to get involved in that.
Okay. Has the TAS ever had a professor in residence? I know the IRS has.
Yeah, the IRS certainly has. Chief Counsel's office has. I don't think we have. I don't think we have. If you need to know that for a story or something, I'll check that. But I don't believe so.
I got a list of them. I just haven't seen where they are.
Yeah. I don't think we have.
On the withholding, you could, if you're struggling getting the withholding rate.
Okay, take care. I remember you going. Oh, yeah. Are you a fan of any particular team?
That I had to hit, and then I tried to translate it into.
Are you from Boston? Our people. Yeah. Oh, really? Well, you know, we all have to make our college decisions on some basis. Yeah, that's probably as good as any.